there's no hard border with Northern Ireland could endure indefinitely if no solution is found. This morning, the Cabinet Minister and prominent Brexiteer Liam Fox said there's a danger that Parliament could steal Brexit from the British people after the government lost 3 Commons votes yesterday. Our political correspondent Ben Wright reports.
Have you lost control of Brexit, Prime Minister?
Under siege but battling on with her beleaguered Brexit plan. Theresa May headed off to Prime Minister's questions this morning and a Parliament that has proved its readiness to defeat the government.
The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 293.
Defeated 3 times just yesterday. MPs forcing the government to publish its legal advice and backing a move to put Parliament in the driving seat if Theresa May's deal is voted down next week. And this morning, one Brexiteer Cabinet Minister was fuming.
I think that there is, as I have written recently, a real danger that the House of Commons, which has a natural Remain majority, may attempt to steal Brexit from the British people.
And he wasn't alone.
I think the most important thing to do is to vote for the Prime Minister's deal. That's the way to secure Brexit and to secure the future of the country.
The Prime Minister, the government and Parliament will deliver on Brexit. That's our job. We should all know that that is our job. And I remain optimistic and confident about that.
It's a message ministers hope will convince Tory Brexiteers to vote for the deal on offer or risk derailing the whole thing. But their deep opposition to the compromise is clear.
If the government loses the meaningful vote, and I will vote against this deal, we should go back to Brussels, make a best final offer, also be very clear that we would walk away and we would contemplate no deal.
This morning the government published the full legal advice MPs had demanded, which says Britain could be left indefinitely in a customs union with the European Union as part of the deal to prevent the return of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic.
We have seen the detail of the legal advice. We have seen the facts that the government tried to hide. Mr. Speaker, this government is giving Northern Ireland permanent membership of the single market and the customs union. The legal advice is clear. It states, despite statements in the protocol that is not intended to be permanent, in international law, the protocol would endure indefinitely.
He will see that the advice that he is holding in his left hand has no difference from the statement that was given. Indeed, I might take up the personal challenge from the right honourable gentleman. I have myself said on the floor of this House that there is indeed no unilateral right to pull out of the backstop.
But Labour said the newly published legal advice spelt out the backstop arrangements more starkly.
Whilst the government's been busy saying that it is temporary or intended to be temporary, what this document shows is that on legal analysis it is enduring until there's another agreement to take its place.
Theresa May will spend the next few days imploring Tory MPs to back her next week, but she faces an uphill battle. The deal disappoints most of her fractured party and the opposition is lined up against it. What happens then is anybody's guess. From another referendum to leaving with no deal, all MPs are talking about a possible Plan B. The House of Commons now has a guaranteed say in shaping next steps with amendments to the government's plan. But there is yet no consensus, and with the Brexit date written into law, time is running out. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
In a moment, we'll speak to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, but first to our legal correspondent, Clive Coleman, who is in Westminster. You've read this document. It's only 6 pages long. What is, for you, the most significant thing?
Well, Sophie, when lawyers are asked to give legal advice, they are asked to speak frankly, and I think many people are going to conclude that the language and the tone of this legal advice is far starker and far franker than the government's presentation of the legal implications of the withdrawal agreement. Now, in particular, in relation to the Northern Ireland backstop, these words: despite statements in the protocol that it is not intended to be permanent and the clear intention by the parties that it should be replaced by alternative permanent arrangements, in international law the protocol would endure indefinitely until a superseding agreement takes its place. Now, there it is in black and white. That in the absence of an agreement to the contrary, the backstop will continue indefinitely. Now, the UK can't force the EU to conclude that kind of agreement. And essentially what I think that does is it punctures the government's optimism on that issue, whereas Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty allowed the UK to pull out of the EU. There is no provision within the withdrawal agreement to allow the UK to pull out of the backstop, and that, I think, is going to pour petrol on the flames of the political debate that will rage and rage.
Clive Coleman, thank you. And let's talk to our Assistant Political Editor, Norman Smith, who is in Westminster. These are certainly extraordinary, rather frenzied times in Westminster. If the Prime Minister's deal isn't approved next Tuesday, just talk us through what does happen then.
Well, if a deal isn't approved, it's quite possible that MPs will seize control of the process, because what we saw last night was a group of, if you like, the Tory greybeards, the wise men of the Tory party, pushing through an amendment which means it'll be up to Parliament to say what should happen next. So they are already preparing for Plan B, trying to sketch out a strategy forward if Mrs May's deal goes down in flames. All of which said, I do not expect the Prime Minister just to sit back and accept defeat. We know Mrs May is a fighter, and the signs are she will meet with Tory Brexiteers to try and maybe come up with her own initiative or a new amendment to try and address their fears over the Northern Ireland backstop and the danger of remaining trapped in this customs union. Now, so far, there is no clarity about what that new sort of amendment might be, but I think it tells us that Mrs May is not simply going to accept defeat. She's going to fight this all the way.
Norman Smith in Westminster, thank you. The British academic, who was held in solitary confinement for months in the United Arab Emirates on spying charges, says he felt as if he was being mentally tortured. Matthew Hedges was jailed for life but returned to the UK last month after being pardoned. In his first broadcast interview, he said he was pressurised into confessing after aggressive questioning gave him panic attacks. Matthew Hedges and his wife, Daniela Tejada, spoke to John Humphreys.
Matthew Hedges had been arrested a few days after he arrived in Dubai, where he'd gone to do research for a PhD. He was accused of spying. He was held in solitary confinement and then sentenced to life in prison. He was pardoned and allowed to come home, and this morning did his first broadcast interview with me on Today. With him, his wife, Daniela Tejada, who fought throughout for his release. Matthew told me how he'd been treated by his captors.
There was no light. I wasn't allowed to do anything to try and distract myself.
You couldn't listen to a radio or anything of that sort?
Not until I had started the court case and my mental health had deteriorated quite substantially. Then I was allowed some form of distraction.
Were you shackled at all?
Yes, I was. Whenever I had to go to the bathroom or to, on occasion, use the shower, I would be escorted by 4 guards and I would wear ankle cuffs. Whenever I was transported between different premises, I was blindfolded and handcuffed.
And you had to stand up for quite a long time?
Yes, so one of the days when I had tried to, again, tell the truth to the interrogators, their reaction was to make me stand for the day wearing ankle cuffs.
All day?
Yes.
Did you feel that you were being tortured?
Psychologically correct. Yes, it felt like it.
And you weren't able to consult lawyers or to talk to Daniela?
I wasn't able to even talk to the embassy officials until I had signed all the confession statements. This was in the 6th or 7th week was when I first saw the embassy. So the Emiratis had got what they had wanted.
And do you know exactly what you'd confessed to? Because you don't speak Arabic.
No, I don't. All I know was that I confessed to being an MI6 agent.
They said you were a captain. Or
yeah, I have little to no clue about this, but they suggested they asked me what rank I was, and they postulated. They said, "Are you a first lieutenant, second lieutenant, a captain, major?" And I panicked, so I said, "I'm a captain."
It took the British Foreign Office 6 weeks even to confirm where he was being held. The couple told me that must not be allowed to happen again.
it is potentially something that could have been avoided had it been dealt with differently a long time ago, but it wasn't because of rules and protocols and relationships with a purported ally. But it shouldn't happen again.
You mean it mustn't happen?
It mustn't happen again. And people have that responsibility to demand their government to change things.
And Matt, if you were to talk to the Foreign Secretary, what would you say to him?
I would thank them for their efforts, but I would also strongly advise them to hear Danny's experience and to maybe look at ways and means in which they could improve their ability to do their to undertake their work abroad.
And your future now?
Immediately, try and relax. Then in the new year, we're gonna maybe start trying to find ways and means to clear my name.
You're not going to give up on that?
No, I don't think it would be the right thing to do. Especially, you've seen what Danny, she's been doing, how strong she is. That gives me the courage to move forward and to keep not only fighting for my own case, but to try and raise those similar issues for other people in those situations, of which there are many.
Well, thank you both very much indeed.
John Humphreys there talking to Matthew Hedges and his wife, Daniela Tejada. The Civil Aviation Authority is taking legal action against Ryanair over its refusal to compensate thousands of customers for delays and cancellations earlier this year. The disruption was due to strikes by Ryanair pilots and cabin crew, but the airline says the strike action amounts to extraordinary circumstances, and as a result, it does not have to pay. Our transport correspondent Tom Burridge reports.
Ryanair staff on strike over the summer. This was Frankfurt. And this was Dublin, outside Ryanair's headquarters. Disputes in several countries over working conditions and pay led to numerous strikes and severe disruption for thousands of passengers. Tom Spencer says he'll never fly Ryanair again. He was best man, had organised an expensive stag do to watch motor racing in Frankfurt. But the day before, their 10 tickets from Manchester on Ryanair were suddenly cancelled. They made it by rearranging their plans at great cost, but the airline has refused to pay him any compensation.
With the money lost, I just feel let down, and I really do feel like Ryanair just do treat their customers with complete contempt.
If an airline refuses to pay, you can appeal to an independent arbitration group called Aviation ADR, which Ryanair had signed up to. Aviation ADR found in the passengers' favour for thousands hit by summer strikes. But Ryanair is still refusing to pay compensation, and that's why the Civil Aviation Authority says it's taking the airline to court.
The airline compensation process is a disaster, really. I can't think of something at which we hear more often about than passengers who can't seem to get their compensation across a whole range of airlines. And that's why we believe that airlines should introduce automatic compensation.
If your flight is delayed more than 3 hours or cancelled, then under European Union law, you're entitled per passenger on a short flight to €250 in compensation. But if there are what's called extraordinary circumstances at play, like bad weather, then the airline doesn't have to pay out. This dispute is about whether strike action falls into that category. In a statement, Ryanair said courts in other European countries have already ruled that strikes do qualify as extraordinary circumstances. But if there is a court case in Britain, it could have implications when any of us fly in the future. Tom Burridge, BBC News.
The time is just after 1:15, our top story this lunchtime. The government publishes its legal advice on Brexit in full, a day after being found in contempt of Parliament. And still to come, a new report finds the Home Office has still not established the full scale of the Windrush scandal.
Coming up in sport later on BBC News, the Olympic and world track cycling champion Danny Rowe is retiring from competition. The 28-year-old says she wants to stay in the sport.
World leaders have gathered in Washington to pay their respects at the state funeral of former President George H.W. Bush. His body has been lying in state at the U.S. Capitol, and it will soon be moved to the National Cathedral for the funeral. George Bush Sr., who served as the 41st U.S. President between 1989 and 1993, died on Friday at the age of 94. Regina Weidenarden reports.
A fitting farewell for America's 41st President. Ahead of his state funeral, tens of thousands of people have lined up to pay their respects to George H.W. Bush. Mourners of every age and background, united in their grief. There was also a special goodbye from his 2-year-old service dog, Sully. President Trump will be a guest but won't speak at the service. The late President Bush insisted he was invited, ending a feud between two families who once traded insults. Preparations are underway here at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. for the state funeral. Former Presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton will also attend, as well as foreign dignitaries, including Prince Charles and Germany's Angela Merkel. Wednesday's an official day of mourning in the United States, a chance for the country to remember a man whose public service few can match. Regina Weidenarden, BBC News, Washington.
Well, our North America correspondent Nick Bryant is at the Washington National Cathedral for us now. A few people arriving behind you. Just set the scene for us, Nick. What's the mood like there?
America is saying goodbye to the last president of its greatest generation, the generation that served in World War II. And there's an extraordinary gathering that is already assembling here at the National Cathedral. All the living presidents will be here and their families, the Trumps, the Obamas, the Clintons, the Carters, and of course, first and foremost, the Bushes. And it will be George W. Bush, the 43rd president, who will be eulogizing his father, the 41st president. And there's such a life of service to reflect on, a life of service that began in the Pacific. George Herbert Walker Bush was a young naval pilot shot down by the Japanese. He was a congressman in Texas. He was an ambassador at the United Nations in China, a former director of the CIA, a vice president for 8 years under Ronald Reagan, and then, of course, the presidency itself. He only served one term. He was written off as a bit of a political failure, but history has reassessed his legacy, and particularly in the foreign realm. Such a key figure in bringing the Cold War to a peaceful end, such a key figure in bringing about the reunification of Germany. That's why Angela Merkel is here today. So too is the former British Prime Minister John Major and Prince Charles, representing Her Majesty the Queen. A global recognition of one of the world's great statesmen.
Nick Bryant in Washington, thank you. The Home Office failed to act on repeated warnings about the negative effects its immigration measures would have on the Windrush generation, and has still not established the full scale of the scandal. That's according to a new report by the government's spending watchdog, the National Audit Office. It accuses the Home Office of failing to protect the rights of people who were in the UK legally. Our Community Affairs correspondent Adina Campbell reports.
The Empire Windrush brings to Britain 500 Jamaicans.
They were invited over to help rebuild post-war Britain, but many of the children from the Windrush generation were never given official documents to prove their rights to legally remain in the UK. The scale of the scandal was first exposed earlier this year and led to heated debates in Parliament.
How many have denied pensions? How many have lost their job? This is a day of national shame.
Today's report by the National Audit Office says it's still not clear just how many people have been affected by the Windrush scandal and the full extent of problems caused by the way the Home Office dealt with immigration policy, previously known as hostile environment. It also says the Home Office acted too late, despite repeated warnings, and that many of the cases could have been avoided.
The way in which it implemented its policies increased the risk of mistakes being made, and even at this stage we don't think that it's showing sufficient interest in finding out who might be affected and putting right the wrongs that they might have suffered.
Since the scandal came to light, more than 6,500 calls have been made to a special task force set up by the Home Office to help people sort out their legal status. About a third of those cases have now been resolved, but 164 people have been removed or detained even though they might have been a long-term UK residents. The Home Office says it's determined to right the wrongs of the past and has set up a review to learn lessons from what's happened. You're not surprised by what's in this report then, no? But campaigners say the government is taking too long, causing more uncertainty for those affected.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. What's quite clear, 7 months on, there is no urgency in the sense of there are people out in the Caribbean, in Africa, that need to come back to Britain or given the choice to come back to Britain. The compensation scheme itself won't start till spring.
The National Audit Office is now recommending that the Home Office put better measures in place to help stop similar problems in the future. Adina Campbell, BBC News.
Councils will discover tomorrow how much funding they'll be getting from the government next year. It comes as new research shows that a growing number of authorities are investing in property and renting it out to boost their income. But there are fears that the investments mean taxpayers' money is being put at risk. Andrew Sinclair reports.
The Medlars have been tenants here at Dairy Farm near Great Yarmouth for the last 5 years. And while Peter's out ploughing, his wife Sally Ann is running a very successful care farm for people with disabilities.
The important thing is for them to have fun on the farm. It's a therapeutic session, so they not only learn new skills, they actually have the time to be with the animals, to be outside in the fresh air.
Norfolk County Council owns 17,000 acres of farmland and it has 145 tenant farmers.
We charge commercial rents for our farm tenants. We collect our rent roll at the moment is just over £2 million a year, and we return at least £600,000 of that to the County Council's general funds each year.
Here's another way that councils are making money. This retail park in Keighley in Yorkshire is owned by Essex County Council. Its commercial property portfolio is worth £40 million and also includes a tower block in Watford and 4 industrial units in Guildford.
We are receiving about £1 million a year from our investment via the commercial fund in property. That goes some way to helping us square off the circle, but to put that into some context, we have to make savings of around £60 million for 1920. So as I say, it helps, of course it does, it's £1 million, but it's not the answer.
Research by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism has found that the number of councils investing in property has doubled in the last 2 years. Norwich City Council has just spent £6 million buying this bank building. It also owns a gym in Ramsgate and a cold store in Corby. Ipswich Borough Council has just bought a share in this retail park, which should generate enough income to cover its entire waste collection bill. But investing in property comes with risks.
Councils are gambling gigantic sums in a game of Monopoly they don't understand. And obviously professional investors invest prudently in a balanced way, but councils are not set up to do this. They're gambling with taxpayers' money and buying property that no professional would touch with a barge pole.
But with council budgets coming under more and more pressure, many authorities see property as a way to help plug the gap. Andrew Sinclair, BBC News, Norfolk.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has today accused the government of creating a hostile environment for people on benefits as it rolls out universal credit. This week, the rollout for the system is being completed for new claimants across Scotland. The government says universal credit is getting more people into work, but it has been blamed for a rise in food poverty. Chris Clements has been to an area in Inverness where people have been on universal credit for 5 years.
The residents here account for 1/5 of all universal credit claimants in the Highlands. One of them is Douglas, an alcoholic and wheelchair user. He's been on the benefit for more than a year.
It's alright when everything's kicked off. When you're getting your payments, everything's fine then. From that point, when you claim first, for the amount of time you have to wait until you get a proper payment. I know you get it all backdated, but backdating is nothing when you're left with nothing.
So what happened with you then when you were left with nothing, as you say?
I was going through the food banks with my support worker.
The DWP says it apologised to Douglas for the delay in his payment. Universal credit has already been blamed for rising rent arrears and food bank use in the area. The Highland Council claims the burden of introducing universal credit has cost it £2.5 million. Money it's since asked the UK government to pay back. Its former leader is now the local MP.
Well, there's everybody at the beginning and all the way through this has said the theory of bringing in a single payment is a fine idea. There's nothing wrong with that. And what we saw immediately were problems with people falling into arrears because of the delayed payment process.
Raigmore Hospital. Self-employed home help Helen is recovering from a neurological illness. She'd been on universal credit until March this year. Because her ward doesn't have Wi-Fi and because she needs to reapply online, Helen must travel from her bed in the stroke unit to a citizen's advice office in the grounds of the hospital.
Well, it makes me feel really unhappy, really upset. I've still got my flat, I still need to pay my bills, and yeah, I'm not that hopeful about it actually. No, I'm just dreading it. Especially like having to go to see someone just to prove that I can't do this and I can't do that, and you know, that's really not looking forward to that.
The DWP says there are complex reasons for the rising rent arrears and food bank use seen in the Highlands, and that neither can solely be blamed on universal credit. 9,000 people are already on the benefit here. Another 13,000 will begin their migration to the new system next year. Chris Clements, BBC News, Inverness.
Doctors in Brazil say that a healthy baby girl has been born after the mother was given a womb transplanted from a woman who was clinically dead. Before the birth, the baby's mother was given drugs that weakened her immune system to prevent her body attacking and rejecting the transplant. Well, our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson is here. It sounds extraordinary. Tell us more about this.
Well, the operation, as you say, took place in Sao Paulo, in Brazil. The patient was a 32-year-old who was born without a womb. It's an extremely rare condition. 1 in 45,000 women are born with this. She was given this womb that was from a woman who was clinically dead, so her brain was no longer functioning and she died very shortly afterwards. What happened was that 6 weeks after this operation, which was successful, the 32-year-old started having periods. Her womb was functioning. 7 months later, her own egg, which had been fertilized, was transplanted into her. She then had a completely normal pregnancy, and the little baby is now nearly a year old.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Is it a medical first?
Well, it is. They're extremely rare, womb transplants. There have only been 39 in the world so far, and only 11 babies born. But what is different about this is that this came from a woman who was clinically dead. Usually it's perhaps a mother who's living, who donates her womb to her daughter. On this occasion, the woman was deceased. They've tried to do it 10 times before. It's never worked before. And the reason they're so excited is, number one, there is no risk to the donor, no surgical risk to the donor. And number two, they're saying that the pool of the donor group, if you like, it is just a larger group, and it means that perhaps many more women might be able to be helped to have babies.
Sophie, thank you. Time now for a look at the weather. Chris Fawkes, hi.
Hi Sophie, and we've got a big change in our weather, a change for most of us to milder conditions, but as that milder air comes in, we've got a lot of low cloud, murky weather and some rain around as well. You can see the mildest air in the south of the UK, a reservoir of cold air though across the north of Scotland, where temperatures at the moment in Braemar -4 degrees Celsius and no chance of getting above freezing all day, but at least the skies are a bit brighter. For most though, a jump in temperatures, Usk going from 4 degrees yesterday afternoon to 13 this afternoon, and the change is brought about by this area of cloud. It's a warm front pushing its way northwards and eastwards across the UK, dragging in that milder air. Maybe milder, but for many of us it's grey, gloomy and pretty wet as well. The exception the far north of Scotland, where we'll hang on to that brighter weather, but temperatures will stay well below freezing for a number of areas, and we do have some fog patches as well for eastern Scotland. Now, overnight tonight, the rain eases for a time, but we'll probably continue to see bits and pieces of drizzle around some of our hills, more persistent rain getting into the west later in the night. And it's one of those nights where temperatures will barely change from what we've got outside at the moment for many areas to what we have by the end of the night. It is going to be a very mild night. Now, for Thursday, that milder air will continue to push its way northwards, reaching Scotland, We've got more rain in the forecast though as well. That rain pushes from west to eastwards, eases, but we'll probably see things turning rather damp and drizzly later in the day for western England, Wales and southern counties of England. A mild day for all of us. Temperatures 10 degrees in Aberdeen and Stornoway. The mildest there still in the south with highs of 14 in London. Way warmer than it should be this time of the year. Further changes in the forecast though towards the end of the week. Another area of low pressure will strengthen and move into the north of Scotland, and this will bring a swathe of strong winds with it. We're talking about gales or severe gales with gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour. South of that swathe of really strong winds, it will also be very blustery in Northern Ireland, Northern England and Wales too. Here a mixture of sunshine and showers. Temperatures still on the mild side. With all this heavy rain heading into northern Scotland, that also could cause some issues through the course of Friday. So Friday brings the risk of some potentially disruptive weather, whether that's from the strong winds in Scotland or the heavy rain that could bring the risk of some localised flooding across the north. Either way, we could see some disruption as we end the week. And it will stay pretty blustery into the weekend as well, a mixture of rain and showers around on Saturday. Sunday, probably the better of the 2 days of the weekend. That's how the weather's looking for the moment. Sophie.
Chris, thank you. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. The government publishes its legal advice on Brexit in full, a day after being found in contempt of Parliament. That's all from the BBC News at 1. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.
Hello there, you're watching BBC News. The time is 1:33. I'm Ollie Foster at the BBC Sports Centre. Southampton have moved quickly to replace Mark Hughes, who they sacked on Monday. Ralph Hasenhüttl has been given the job. He had a successful spell in the Bundesliga.